Hey YouTube, welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video with Mr. Terry as I continue my quest for historical knowledge here on the internet. Alright, today we are watching part 2 of the history of Russia. Specifically, part 2 is history of the USSR. Now, in part 1, they just kind of barely glossed over kind of the Soviet era, so it looks like what they're doing with this one is really focusing on the Soviet era. If you did not see my part 1 or the part 1 original video from these guys, there'll be a link down in the description. Make sure you do that so you can check that out. Give them their credit and like and subscribe over there. And we'll go ahead and get started.
This episode is supported by CuriosityStream. Start watching documentaries and other non-fiction titles at curiositystream.com/SUIBHNE and use the code Suibhne for 1 month free.
How do you say their name? The second video I've seen from them. Suibhne. How do you pronounce that? Is that it? Yeah.
And by the patrons who chose today's topic.
Great
Sign
channel,
up at Patreon to vote for the next country.
All they're doing similar to what we do. If you would like to get involved in polls for this for our channel here, this History of Russia series was the video that won this week's poll, this Patrons Pick poll. So if you would like to also get involved, pledgers of all tier levels or donation levels get to participate in my weekly poll for videos they get on here. So if that's something you'd be interested in too, there's also a link down below.
In the city of Brussels, German philosopher Karl Marx and his collaborator Friedrich Engels penned the Communist Manifesto, a book espousing a radical form of socialism which spoke of utopia and a revolutionary overthrow of the capitalist bourgeoisie. The same year, the revolutions of 1848 erupted in France, the German Confederation, Poland, and the Italian peninsula. Although these revolutions would be quelled, change was in the air.
People always found it interesting that, with Karl Marx, that, is kind of seen as kind of one of the founding figures of communism. He doesn't get the long-term support or long-term success in his home country as he does in other places. And for that, I don't know, maybe the general public often might believe that Karl Marx is like actually a Russian, when of course he isn't. But yeah, interesting how kind of some of these things happen where it's like where they're from originally does not actually happen there. You know what I mean? It doesn't really get seen there. A couple things that just quickly came to mind would be like John Calvin, who, the Protestant reformer who was from France, but gets more of his success more in Switzerland and some of the other regions, or even some religions kind of like that, like Buddhism, which was founded in India, but doesn't get the long-term success there due to just the prevalence and longevity of, like Hinduism, but gets popular in other parts of the world, like in China or in parts of Southeast Asia. So yeah, interesting how that's, still a thing, that happens in history. Nice. I like their little animations. They're good.
It had been more than a century since Russia had been invaded by Napoleon, and now in 1917 the powerful German Empire had captured Poland, Belarus, and Lithuania.
We all learned though, right, from the Germans, though, and Napoleon, don't invade Russia in the winter, right? Let's see who'll be the next person or next people to try that and probably fail, right?
The Russian people were starving in the streets, and soon the capital was in revolution. First in the February overthrow of the monarchy, but later in October, the more infamous takeover by Vladimir Lenin's Bolsheviks, sparking the Russian Civil War. One of the deadliest civil wars in human history, its casualties outnumbered even those of the First World War.
1917 was such a rough year for Russia. It coincided again with some extreme difficulties in the war. there on the Eastern Front. It was not going well. And then that, definitely indirectly leading to some of the internal conflicts. Again, like the first revolution, which in February was more in the end of taking down the monarchy, where the second one was more about kind of communism, because you had this provisional government in between. So, yeah, 1917, maybe the most important year in Russian history, right? So many things happening there.
The war was broadly divided into the Reds, the Bolsheviks, and the White Movement, a loosely organized alliance of anti-Bolsheviks, anarchists, foreign powers, and civilian militias. The war was devastating. The biggest killer was starvation. The Soviets, a Russian word for workers' union, surrendered to Germany in 1918, and the Reds and the Whites committed numerous mass killings of one another in the Red and White Terror respectively, including the Bolsheviks' brutal murder of the Russian royal family in their Yekaterinburg homestead.
Yeah, people often forget that. Well, I mean, you hear about the revolutions, right? You got the first one, the second one there in 1917, but the civil war that actually was created, or that started as a result of the revolution, right? Because like you had this revolution, in October, but it still had to be fought over and solidified, and in this scenario, it had to be done through some really nasty fighting. Yeah, having to do with this. It's like they just are finishing up basically with Germany, right? So they just went through all that incredible devastation, and then actually a lot of the soldiers they end up leaving. I mean, there was actually plenty of mutinies actually, in a way, during World War One, for some of these Russian soldiers to basically go home and take part in some of these revolutions, to go and whether it's protect their families or fight for the political ideas, whatever that is. And then key feature being basically the slaughter of the royal family there, which has become quite infamous.
The Reds soundly defeated the Whites after Leon Trotsky forced conscription, and the Western Allies began withdrawing troops at the conclusion of the Great War. Lenin planned on expanding the revolution to Europe, but was handed a crushing defeat by the Poles at the Battle of Warsaw, which saw that Bolshevism would be contained to the former Russian Empire. Separate Soviet republics were formed in their territory and united to form the USSR. When Lenin died, a young radical criminal with the Communist Party took power: Joseph Stalin. Civil wars rarely breed a stable and united society, and the USSR was no different. To secure their grip on power, the NKVD, or Soviet Secret Police, was formed, rounding up and executing thousands of anti-revolutionaries. The Gulag was established, the infamous Siberian concentration camps, where millions would eventually be worked to death. The USSR was now a totalitarian one-party state.
Not a place you wanted to be, right? Basically has become infamous in meme culture, basically, of it. But meme culture never hardly knows much about what the actual history is, right? But the Gulag becomes just so envious. You're a political enemy, you're going up to Siberia and may never be heard from again. You know what I mean? And yikes.
Stalin is considered by many to be the most evil man in history, a paranoid and cruel tyrannical narcissist who surrounded himself with those loyal to him. He instituted radical reforms to transform Russia into an industrial power, causing a man-made famine in Ukraine, southern Russia, and Kazakhstan.
The thing Russia had always kind of lacked, or in conjunction with the rest of the Western world, was industrialization. They had these proto-industrialization type of movements, and even attempted, more official industrial movements under the Tsarist government, but it always not worked, or at least not to the level of being able to compete with the West. Some of that has to do with geography and some of the resources available and things like that. But it's actually, too, also one of the reasons why Russia was still practicing serfdom, into this era, up until this era. One of the last places to actually do that, in the Industrial Revolution, basically made serfdom pretty much obsolete, with the idea of, again, serfdom being kind of this relationship, almost like a feudal relationship between landowners and the peasants, where the peasants are kind of bound to those landowners, because they need them to survive, you know what I mean? And kind of built upon that. And the industrial nature of World War One really showed how important industrialization was. And Stalin understood that Russia basically needed to go under pretty much a superhuman industrial effort to basically become an industrial power. It's kind of where he gets his name too. So I mean, Stalin, means man of steel. One of the big things that he focused on was metallurgy and production that way, mechanical production there, and put them into these 5-year plans where they basically set these incredible quotas of where they want production levels to be, and they're actually very successful. But you're also talking about here the cost of this industrialization, and also you can't separate that from the political kind of political manufacturing that he's also doing with taking out people and trying to keep the revolution, or the ideas of the revolution still around, or making sure there's not dissent, of course, for him. So this incredible part of that, so that they become very intertwined there. There's violence, in many different ways, both supporting both sort of revolutions in a way, politically and industrially.
Which killed millions and made famine in Ukraine, southern Russia, and Kazakhstan,
Yeah,
which killed
one of the most
millions.
infamous ones.
He rounded up and executed members of the Communist Party, wealthy oligarchs, and the Red Army, and executed them in the Great Purge.
And that sounds interesting, right? Because, people from their own party, Stalin was notorious for doing that and being almost on an incredible level of paranoia, even among some of the closest people that he went through the revolution with, that again did not trust them, that they were looking for his power or to undermine him or something like that. So that becomes such a massive thing. One of the places, I don't know if they'll get to this, but something I think that's really important about his the purge here, the Great Purge as it's going to be known, was also purging the military leadership. That was one of the places that he feared most, was the military as a group that could have the power to maybe stop him. And it's said that of the elite military leadership, he had purged probably about half of them, which ends up also being kind of bad, especially when World War II breaks out and there's a severe lack of military leadership, especially in those early years. But yeah, let's continue.
Millions of political prisoners were executed or sent to the Gulag. He made an alliance with Adolf Hitler, dividing Europe between their spheres of influence. And, together, the two tyrannical warmongers invaded Poland in 1939, beginning the Second World War. The Soviets narrowly escaped war with Britain and France, who condemned the invasion because their treaty with Poland only required action in the case of German aggression, not Soviet. Free from their interference, the Soviets invaded Finland, but due to Stalin's purges, the invasion was a stunning failure. So they set...
That's gone underneath kind of history about the Finnish defense here of some of the success that they had. But you see too how the purge was early on here starting to affect them, because purging all those people and especially the military leadership is going to have effects. And you saw that there, but that's not to take, of course, anything away from how well the Finns actually did.
Settled instead to annex the Baltic states and Moldova, while committing atrocities in Poland, such as the Katyn massacre, which they later blamed on the Nazis. Events took a sharp turn when
Easy to blame stuff on the Nazis, right?
Hitler betrayed his Russian ally and invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, and so began the 4-year-long conflict that would see the capture of millions of POWs, the starvation of millions of Soviet citizens, and the deportation of millions more communist officials and Jews.
It's like these people have, especially in like this western part where all the brown turned to green there. Think of all of the, like, they've been taken over and had all these things happen to these different forces, right? They at first got invaded in World War One, okay, and then were subject to the Civil War, right? The Russian Civil War here and all that brutality. And then the Stalin years, right, of all of that incredible brutality. And it's almost at that point they'd be like welcoming the Germans, but that was not going to happen because then the Nazis come in and then it's more difficult. These people of these last about 25 years, holy cow, look at what they've gone through. And it's from a lot of different people. Like you're saying, there's Jews and just other communists. And it's like any over this 25-year period, no matter what your standing was or who you were in this region, in that 25 years, something horrifying was probably, you were probably subjected to.
Concentration camps. By some estimates, nearly half of the USSR's 4.8 million Jewish people lost their lives, most of them living in the Russian shtetl. The death toll was aggravated by Stalin's refusal to evacuate cities, thinking that the Red Army would fight harder to protect their homes, such as in Leningrad where hundreds of thousands starved in the 3-year-long siege, and how Russian tanks were sent into battle half-built, and how in Stalingrad,
That's been notorious for how ill prepared the Russians were. One thing, of course, they had was numbers, but they were not well equipped. And yeah, I mean, there's those famous stories of them going into battle, the soldiers, and like given like a box of ammo or something, or sorry, yeah, like a box of ammo, but there weren't enough guns. The idea was basically be a part of the charge and then pick up the guy's gun that dies in front of you, kind of thing, and just not being ready. And Stalin always had, definitely thought of this idea of how how Russians, how patriotic they would be, though, and that would overcome anything. And yeah, they end up winning this, but at such a lopsided loss of lives.
the largest battle in history, logistical failures meant that soldiers often went into battle with unloaded rifles, and those deserting the front line were shot by their own comrades. Stalingrad was, however, the turning point of the war, and a point of pride for the Soviet people, managing to surround the overextended and unarmored German army, ensuring the Wehrmacht would advance no further. The Red Army soon launched a large-scale counteroffensive, pushing back the overextended Wehrmacht the next 2 years.
Well, that was the big one, right? That everyone talks about was the victory at Stalingrad, one of these early victories for them against the Germans, was the most important turning point of the war, where 2 million people are going to die, which is the largest casualty battles in history. See, even with those, still I believe more Russians than Germans died. I thought the ratio was 800,000 Germans to 1.2 million Russians. But the key being, though, that those 800,000 that Hitler's going to lose, they never are able to replace. They never are able to replace.
Their progress was so quick that it looked like the Soviet Union was going to defeat Nazi Germany single-handedly, as Allied operations up until now had focused on North Africa and Italy. In fact, the Red Army had on their own pushed back the Wehrmacht a massive 1,600 kilometers of captured territory to the border of the German Reich, before the Allies had even opened a second front at Normandy.
Yeah,
it was a triumphant moment for the young and poor nation.
It was also the moment when, it was also, there's time now when the Western Allies are going to start to actually try to strategize with the Russians and basically make a deal. Especially when the Americans are going to get more and more involved in Europe, seeking Russian help with Japan. You know what I mean? So they wanted the Russians to push through from the east. And the deal basically ended up kind of being that Stalin says that, okay, well, if you guys open up a front in the west, then we will help with Japan. But if you don't do that, then we can't help you. You know what I mean? So added to this, the Russian momentum in the east, of course, with the Western Allies, that's really going to help things. And have to start splitting, German forces and things like that, have to worry about two fronts, the thing that they had been successful basically at avoiding for the entire war thus far.
Winning the war on sheer grit and manpower. However, the term winning is probably not the right word, as they had lost between 20 and 30 million people in the war, more than any other nation. At the conclusion of the war, the Allies and the Soviets became enemies once more, with Stalin's reluctance to leave occupied Eastern Europe, choosing instead to set up Soviet-friendly governments in all captured territory. Soviet territory even extended back to Stalin's original deal with Hitler, and when a metaphorical Iron Curtain descended across Europe, the Cold War began.
Yeah, Churchill talking about that, right? The Iron Curtain, because again, that was supposed to be part of the deal that they made. Was it at Yalta? Remember that they said that Stalin had promised that he would leave these territories that were going to be invaded or that would be invaded to invade Germany, and that, of course, doesn't happen. Now, his justification that he ends up bringing over was pretty strong in the fact that he said, okay, well, we've just gone over World War I and World War II. We have now been invaded by the West twice. Okay? We have the right to defend ourselves by basically staying in occupying some of these regions because history has shown us the West is aggressive towards the East. And so that's the thing that he would definitely try to sell with this. But this was not looked very well upon by the West. They just end up seeing this more of it was an attempt to spread communism and basically create this Russian Empire, right? Almost like recreating the one of the Romanov dynasty with taking a lot of these territories again, and it looked like a big threat that this was happening, right? And then what makes it even more, frightening, I guess, for the West was when after the Chinese Civil War and they have a communist regime, right? It looked like communism was sort of winning in this ideological battle between kind of capitalism and communism, or even on a political level of democracy basically being threatened. That's how the West also viewed this.
The Cold War deserves a video of its own, but suffice it to say that it would change the world forever. How did Tsarist Russia become such a hotbed of revolutionaries in the first place? From the reforms of Peter the Great to the wise rule of Empress Catherine, perhaps no less a destabilizing factor in Russia's history came with Napoleon Bonaparte's invasion of Russia.
True.
In the two-part series, Napoleon, the Invasion of Russia, you can learn about this event. It covers the last great conflict to touch Russia in the century before the Great War, and the social and economic factors that resulted from the French Revolution. I highly recommend this documentary for a more in-depth look at Russian history, which you can watch for free over at CuriosityStream. A great place to watch amazingly well-produced documentaries and other non-fiction content. Simply use the URL curiositystream.com/Suibhne for a 31-day free trial to watch this or any other show you'd be interested in, including history, technology, science, and so much more. Give the site a visit and start watching amazing documentaries today.
Cool.
Thank you for watching. Remember to like and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter for any updates and consider supporting at Patreon. Until next time.
All right, so we finally heard the content or the channel name, Suibhne. Awesome. They did great. I saw they have a bunch of videos, a lot of views and stuff like that. So if you liked this series, definitely let me know if you would like me to look into more of their episodes over there. But that was pretty good. All right, well, back to the content of the video. Looks like, yeah, so they focus more on the World War II era of the Soviet Union rather than kind of the Cold War. I mean, and I know that's plenty. There's, gosh, doing an entire history in the Soviet Union in this kind of format is so difficult. You'd be doing tons of parts, So, but it's good. I'm glad with this episode that people were able to see the connection between how these wars directly influenced the creation of the Soviet Union and the role of kind of the Stalin and kind of his processes, how that impacted the wars as well, right? And especially with this one, they go more over World War II with that and seeing that connection there. I think that's important to understand all of the factors that went into this era of the creation of the Soviet Union. Would the Soviet Union have been created if not for the hardships of World War I? Would that have garnered enough support for the communist cause? You know what I mean? But that's one of the, a very good question, of course, to answer there. Because then there are other factors even beyond, of course, World War I, of course, right? With peasantry and just the what people saw as a lot of the abuse from the upper class in Russia, both from the boyars, the noble landowners, and as well as the Romanov family themselves, and kind of some longer lasting issues that people are having with their government. There's a lot of things that go involved in that, and they're all important to study for sure. All right, well, just a few things. Original video will be down below. Be sure to give them a like and subscribe. If you like what we're doing here, love to have you as a subscriber as well. Definitely enable notifications so you can be part of our live premieres and live streams that go on here. Definitely join our Discord server if you have not. We got a great active community of history fans and good people over there. There's also a link down below for that. This video was chosen by the Patreon pledgers for my channel. So if that's something you would like to be a part of, there'll be a link also down below that you can check that out and be a pledger. Right now things are starting at $1. for the first level of pledges, and any kind of support you can give, of course, is awesome. Never expected, but very, very appreciated. But most important thing, I'm glad that you're here joining me, and hopefully appreciating history as much as I am. All right, with that, we'll go ahead and end it here, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye.